Okay, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's Wednesday webinar here at TimeSolv. I'm Scott Clayson, and as a reminder, this is our monthly webinar. It's the second Wednesday of the month where you can learn all the tips and tricks to get the most out of TimeSolv. It is the top of the hour here in Minnesota, noontime here. Good afternoon, everybody who might be with us on the East Coast. Good morning to anybody who is with us in the Mountain and Pacific time zone. We're going to spend, this is going to be a little bit of a truncated webinar, about a half hour or so long, for one very simple reason. My 14-year-old son is arriving back from a 8th grade school trip from Europe in about, he's going to be landing in about 15 minutes. And I need to go pick him up at the airport. And luckily, I live close to the airport here in Minneapolis. It's only about 10 minutes away, so he'll be going through customs and all that. But we will get through some 4 main topics here. But like I said, I would like to wrap this up in about 30 minutes or so and not the normal 45 minutes to an hour that we normally take. So once again, by the way, for those that were at last month's webinar, hopefully you can see my screen, as I did not share my screen for like the first 15 or 20 minutes of last month's webinar, and I'm still totally embarrassed about that, what happened there. So that was the first thing I did when I got on here today, was to share my screen. So hopefully you can see it okay. And you can hear me okay as well. If we have questions, again, there should be in the bottom of your viewing panel here, your viewing screen, an area where there's Q&A and a chat where you can ask questions. You can raise your hand as well if you have something that you need to cover. So with that being said, let's go ahead and get started for the month and talk about the 4 things that we'll discuss in today's webinar. And once again, this always covers the previous month's tip of the weeks that we send out. Generally, it's sent out every Monday. Just things that maybe you didn't know about with TimeSolv, or new additions and features that we've rolled out that you need to be aware of. So let's go ahead and talk about the 4 things we're going to look at today. First, we want to talk about payment allocations, and this might seem like a real basic thing, but you'd be surprised how many people we work with that they may record payments in TimeSolv, but they never do the allocation of that payment to a specific invoice. Therefore, they never really know what invoices have or haven't been paid. So we'll review that briefly. Then I want to talk about a couple of updates that have been put into TimeSolv recently. One is the ability in the invoice settings of a matter to specify, when you go to generate draft invoices for that matter, whether you want them to be time only, expense only, or both. Previously, you could only do that at the draft invoice screen level. Now you can do that at the matter level and skip that step. And we're going to have another update to this feature rolling out, I think, by the end of this week. And then I also want to cover, there's a couple of updates that we've done to some reports that were popular requests that people were asking about. So I want to make sure that everyone's aware of a couple of the updates that we have. And then the last one is the tip of the week that we had just this past Monday, just a couple of days ago. And again, this came from some, quite often we get phone calls from people who want to delete a client or a matter or a professional who may have left the firm, and they're finding they're having issues with that. And I'll walk you through the difference between and why it's going to be better to actually just deactivate those items instead of trying to delete them. So that is what we're going to cover today. So without further ado, let's talk about payment allocations. So what we're going to do is run through how you go about recording an incoming payment to a specific client and their matter, and then how you go about allocating those payments to an invoice, and then the types of ways that you can do allocations when you have payments that are going to cover more than one particular matter. So let's open up TimeSolv. And one thing, again, to kind of step back a little bit and take a look at is, when you go to your sent invoices screen, this is actually a good place to almost get a chance to see the running AR, if you will, for your invoices. You can bring up the sent invoices for any time period, and then you can sort by the balance due. And it's kind of a nice thing to see who's paid and who hasn't paid. But let's make sure that we all understand how we go about actually recording payments, and not just recording payments, but allocating them to a specific invoice. And that's the key thing here. So if you notice here, these are a group of sent invoices that I have. Your list is probably going to be a lot longer, obviously. And none of these have been paid yet. They all still have an outstanding balance based on the amount that was sent out. Now, over here in the very far right corner, you can see we have a pay icon where you can actually then go straight to our payment screen. It's going to pre-populate the payment to the client it matters. So let's go ahead and go there, and I'll show you the easy way to do this. So you click on the little payment icon. It's going to pre-populate the date, the client, and matter. It doesn't pre-populate the amount of the invoice because we don't necessarily assume that the payment that you received is for the exact amount of the invoice. It could be that they're only paying you for partial, or maybe they're paying you for the invoice and then even more for future work, and there's going to be a credit and so on. So we don't make that assumption by populating this amount field. But in this case now, remember, you can set what type of payment is this. Is it a payment? Is it a credit? You know, because you can apply credits here, or is it a write-off that you're going to be completely writing off the payment of an invoice? Then you can choose here what's going to be the payment method. Now, if you have LawPay, that you're using that as well to receive credit cards or ACH, hopefully you've hooked up your LawPay account to TimeSolv, and when people pay you using the client portal we have, using LawPay, and they make an ACH or credit card payment, you can that payment and allocation will automatically happen. So again, we'll cover this in another webinar because we do go over it periodically. But if you're not using LawPay to accept credit card or ACH payments, A, you really should start thinking about doing it. It's a great way to receive payment quickly. And B, it integrates with TimeSolv, where you can allow your clients to access their invoices and pay their invoices via ACH or credit card right through our portal. That payment will automatically come into TimeSolv and automatically be allocated to that invoice. But if you do it by hand, maybe you don't have LawPay, you accept credit cards when they call in, they tell you the credit card number over the phone, or whatever it might be, you can mark with the payment method here. For oftentimes in this area, it's by check is the payment method. The reference number could be the check number, and then let's say they are going to pay that full invoice, which was $5,000. And then, of course, you can put in any notes that you need to put in right here, and you're going to hit save. And down below here now, you're going to see for this specific client and matter, you can take a look and see, you know, what kind of payments are available to allocate, ones that are unallocable, ones that you already have allocated, or just all. You could do it by the last 120 days. There's lots of things you can do here in how you filter the payments that you can view. In this case, we're going to see that we have a payment of $5,000 that we just did, obviously. And now we want to allocate that payment. Right now we have that payment, but that invoice hasn't been marked as paid. So you need to come over here to the far right where it says allocate. When you click on that, first of all, it's going to bring up by default all the matters for this client. In this case, I have, you know, I paid here made a payment for matter B specifically, but it's bringing up outstanding balances I have for matter C, E, and F as well. If you just want to see the matter that you're allocating the payment for, just uncheck this box. And you can see now it's a little bit more clear here what you're making the payment for. Now, the payment amount, you don't have to necessarily pay off the entire balance. It'll automatically populate this field. And even when you check this box, it'll automatically populate these fields. But let's say you have this $5,000 and you want to do $4,000 here and spread out 1,000, you know, do whatever. You can calculate how you want the payments to be allocated in this field. You also have a couple of different options that can be automated basically. And that is, you could say, hey, allocate to the oldest invoice first, or break it up and compute this payment or this allocation equally amongst these 4 invoices. Because again, here's an important thing. Even though you made a payment towards this specific matter, you can allocate that payment across any matter for this client. Doesn't have to be this specific one, okay? And for people who have consolidated invoices, or for people who may receive payment for multiple invoices in one payment, yes, you have to enter the payment under a specific matter, but then you can allocate it against all of these different matters. Okay, so let's talk about then the actual allocation. We're going to do the simple one here. And I'm going to just check the box. And I'm going to allocate just this invoice here. It's a $5,000 balance. It's a $5,000 payment. So I'm going to go up here and I'm going to click allocate. It's going to show me this is exactly what I'm allocating. Hit save. And now it changes here and it says reallocate. So you could change this and reallocate it again in some different fashion if you'd like. But now if I go over to my sent invoices, more importantly, now I'm going to show that this invoice has been paid. So now I know that I have a record of what's being paid. This is key for your AR, for your accounts receivable. Yes, you might, if you apply payments and you don't ever allocate them to any of your invoices, yes, your balances and your payments received might balance out and be equal. But if they're not, and you never allocated any of those payments to specific invoices, you don't know where that money is falling short. If you have received, you've sent out $10,000 worth of invoices and you show $7,000 worth of payments, if you never allocated those invoices, you'll never know where that missing $3,000 is. In this case, now you'd be able to see specifically, I have 15 grand out in invoicing. I have 9,000 still owed to me. Well, this guy's paid. Now I got to collect from these people. So this is why it's ultra important to make sure that you're allocating those payments, not just recording the payments, but allocating them to the invoices so the invoices get marked as paid. I do have a question here. If payments are made through an intermediary handling client finances with a charge against the invoice amount, can you enter the payment received and write off the balance separately? I'm not 100% sure on that. I would suggest that you contact our support staff directly to ask them that question. That's a little more complicated than I can answer. So I would suggest contacting support at support@timesolv.com or calling our 1-800 number, 1-800-715-1284, because I just don't know the answer to that question off the top of my head, and I apologize for that. Okay, let's move on then to our next topic, since we talked about allocating invoices here. And we wanted to talk about invoice settings on the matter itself. And I'll walk you back through some of the changes we've made here. Right now, or you guys might have been used to the idea that when you created your draft invoices, you came over here and you click New Draft Invoice. Previously, you had the option down in this area to say, I want to create draft invoices for time only or expense only or time and expense. And we've moved that actually over to the specific matter area where you can designate when you're setting up a matter. You can click on the matter here, go under invoice settings. Here you can designate, do I want to have just time only entries created when I create draft invoices for this matter, expense only. The fixed fees has always been here, and so is the time and expense. For those if you're doing contingency billing, you know you're only going to be billing out expenses, you know, for the foreseeable future. You know, you would choose this option. Then when you go to create draft invoices, it's only going to pull expenses for this particular matter that you have, or you could do time and expense. So again, you want to set this up ahead of time so you don't have to really think about it when you're going to create your draft invoices. Now, that being said, we have had some people, since we rolled this out, really liked the option of being able to, while they're creating their drafts on the fly, determine if they want to have time only or expense only or time and expense. So we are rolling out an update that I think will be here by the end of this week even, where that will return to the draft invoice screen. By default, it will be set that when you go to create draft invoices for all of your clients or matters, it will grab whatever the invoice setting is over on the matter side. But if you want, you could change it to expense only. So if you are doing contingency billing, let's say, but there is 1 month's worth of time that for whatever reason you have to put on an invoice, you could choose time only, and that would override whatever you have set at the matter level. So again, TimeSolv, it very much runs off a hierarchy type system. This is the most granular level. Right when you're creating the drafts, you could override what you have set at the matter level, and that will return here by the end of the week. You should see that again in the bottom of this pop-up screen in creating draft invoices. But for those that don't have to really worry about that so much, it's just a matter of when you're setting up your matter, determine the billing arrangement. Is it going to be time and expenses, which is what the majority of the people do? Is it going to be time only, expense only, or the fixed fee type invoices? Set it and forget it. And then when you go to create your draft invoices for the month, it will generate the bills and pull either time or expense or fixed fee or whatever it might be based on what you'd set up when you set up the matter. So I hope that's clear for everybody. Okay. Let's move on to our next update that we have run. And that is a couple of reports that we have made some modifications to, again, based on the feedback of our customers. The first one is when you go to create a budget report, it now will include, and it did not include previously, any expense budget that you may have created at the matter level. And I'll show you how that looks in just a second. And then the second thing is for time and expense entry reports. I know this is very common where a lot of law firms potentially have to give a report to a judge, let's say, and you need a time and expense report. Previously, we did not include the time entry description in that output, and now we do. And it also will include, if there's expense entries, the quantities and any markup and so on in that report. We didn't have that previously. So, but there is a caveat to this that I'll describe for you when we get there. So let's first show you the expense budgets on reports. So I'm going to go into a particular client and matter F here. And I've set up a budget on my budget tab here. And I have budgeted $10,000 worth of fees and $5,000 worth of expenses. And then I've gone ahead and you've seen I've actually made $7,000 worth of time entries, and I've made a $10 expense entry, whatever it might be. Okay. And I need to generate a report on the budget that I've created, the budget versus the actual and so on. So we would go under the report setting here, go down to our budget. I'm going to choose that specific client and matter. I'm going to group by matter here, okay? And then I'm going to generate the report as a PDF. And you can see now that previously we didn't have this expense budget right in here. This will now appear on the report. And again, this is a report that you could give to your client ahead of time. You could also, if you break this down by task and you apply a budget to a specific task or to a professional, whatever it might be, because a reminder that there's all sorts of budgeting options that you have in TimeSolv. You can budget in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different ways you can set up a matter budget. You can do an overall matter budget, which I just did. You could assign a budget for specific professionals who are assigned to work this matter. So if you have 2 or 3 people working a specific matter, you could put in a budget for them. You know, in this case, I don't have any that I've assigned to this to do this work yet, but I can assign specific hours and fees and expenses for it by the professional. You could do it by the task code. So this is for those who have to do electronic billing, and you may have to, again, give this to a judge. The specific task code, assign a budget to the task code. Same thing with expense code. If you create a matter plan with your own specific tasks, you could then enter a budget for that. And then the most granular way is you could budget by the task that you created and the professional who's assigned to work that task based on the number of hours that you may give them to complete a task. It'll multiply by the rate you have set for this matter, and then that'll create the budget. So there's all sorts of different ways you can create budgets here, and that budget report will now include the expense codes. So just a quick update on that. The second update, and this might be more applicable to more of you, is with our time and expense entries report. And previously, I'll do this for just, again, so it doesn't do a whole ton of expense and time entries. Previously, when you exported this, It did not include the time entry description or expense entry descriptions or the quantities or so on. If you have to output this as a CSV file in order to get this information as of right now. Okay, so that's important to understand. You need to generate this report as a CSV, a comma separated value field that will open in Excel. And I'm going to generate this report. And this will give me a lot more information than it used to, beyond just those descriptions too. And I'll show you how it looks here in a second when it gets done generating. So here, what was just generated. Okay, and so I'm going to go ahead and, so previously, it did not include the description. It did include, if you had a task code, the task code, here, but oftentimes, and you can populate the task code to be part of the description, but maybe you want more to that than just the task code. So now the description is included in that export. It's going to tell you over here whether this entry was time or expense. It's going to tell you whether it's a billable one. It's going to tell you who worked on it, what their rate was. The start stop, this is new. So if you put in a start time and a stop time, it actually would appear in this report. And here's the big thing is the duration. The duration wasn't on there previously like this, okay? So you kind of had to do your own math by seeing the total amount and the price. And then the same thing, so you have, again, for this expense entry, for example, the price was a $10 word processing expense entry. We had one quantity, if you will, and no markup. And so it gave you the total amount. So these are all additional fields that I know that a lot of firms have to use when submitting reports to judges for cases of that, whatever it might be. So I think this is a pretty big update. Again, it's available when you export out as a CSV file only, okay? Okay, so those are the two report updates that just came out within the last couple of weeks. The last thing I wanted to go over, and this will be somewhat brief, is just talking about the difference between deleting and inactive. And you all may have run into this from time to time. And I'll show you what I mean. Tell me if this looks familiar. You have a client, an old client, you want to delete them. You want to get them out of TimeSolv. You click on the client name, you go over here to delete this client, you hit OK, and you get a message that looks like this. Could not delete client due to its usage in invoice. Well, you have some invoices with this client. So you'd have to go and delete those invoices, find those invoices, delete them, and so on. There's a lot of work to do. And then same thing if you have a matter, let's say, and you want to delete the matter. I'm going to this HR employment contract. I just want to delete it. And you're going to get this sort of message. No, you can't because it's being used by an invoice, by an expense entry, a time entry. A document is associated with it, a calendar event. You'd have to go through and delete all of these things to then delete the matter. Because again, TimeSolv is a hierarchy. You have very specific pieces of information in TimeSolv. You have time entries, you have expense entries, you have invoices, you have draft invoices, and so on. Once you create those things, if you try to delete the master or parent thing, it's not going to allow you to, because what's going to have that time entry is still going to be there. So people ask, well, what should we do here? Well, the answer is make that matter just inactive. Well, how do I do that? Go over here on this general tab right here. You have the option to make this matter active or inactive. Just check the box and it'll become inactive. At the client level, you have the option, again, in the general tab, under status, to say, is this an active or inactive, or a prospect even, client. And you might notice then, I mean, they're not, you want to have a record of all this data. Just because you're not doing any work for them anymore doesn't mean you may not have to go back. This has to do with like conflict checks and other things. You still want that data in TimeSolv so you have access to it for whatever reason down the road. And if you notice, when you're viewing your clients and matters here, by default, it's going to show you all the active clients and matters. But you can, if you'd like to see everything, all active and inactive, or if you need to look up a specific inactive matter, you can. Okay, so this is a way you can filter that if you ever need to go back and view those. But more importantly now, it's sort of deleted from your world or from your view. You're not going to see it in all your active stuff. It's going to be out of the way, which is probably what you were trying to achieve to begin with. Same thing, and this is more important now when it comes to professionals. You have people who leave your firm. And again, if you try to delete them, let me show you. If I try to delete Tony Hill, it's going to give me, I can't. It's being used by other records and can't be deleted. I have time entries made by Tony Hill. I have matters that have been assigned to Tony Hill, whatever it might be. But you don't want to pay for them, right? Because they've left the firm. You don't want to have to pay for their license. Well, it's very simple. Make them inactive. And here's how you do it. You click on their name. I'm going to click on Mike Hagman here. And you're going to go right under here to status and just make them inactive. Hit save. Go back here to your professional list, and you're going to see you have Mike Hagman is inactive. You will not pay for that seat now. The next time the monthly billing comes along. Now, Michelle, you asked a good question. Is it possible to hide the inactive professionals from this list? You notice that I don't have that active versus inactive filter like I did with clients and matters. But here's what I would do. This is sortable by active. So you could certainly click this, click it again, and all your inactive professionals will at least be at the bottom of the list. So they'll be out of the way, I guess, for lack of a better word. They'll still be there because you have old data, that they're associated with, but you at least won't have to see them here in this list. And you're right, the list is no longer then alphabetical, right? So it's not a perfect answer, and that's a good point. There should be a way, I think, and I'll submit a ticket to our dev team to be able to display the professionals by active only, and then inactive if you need to. Because I think you're right. That's a good point. You should be able to, if they're inactive, kind of get them off the screen, similar to clients and matters. So that's a really good point. Thank you, Michelle. Okay, well, that is all I have to cover today. Like I mentioned at the top, for those that joined a little bit late, I am selfishly making this a shorter webinar because my son is now, I believe, arrived in Minneapolis from Amsterdam, where his 8th grade school trip was flying in from. So a little 14-year-old is back, and I haven't seen him for 10 days. So I'm very excited to see him. And like I said, I'm a short ride from the airport. So it looks like he did arrive just a couple of minutes ago. So, but I think it was important we got through everything here. The questions that you may have, I always want to make sure I bring this up for everybody. And especially that first question about the payments that are made through an intermediary, handling the client finances, can you enter the payment and then write off the balance? Email support there at support@timesolv.com or call 1-800-715-1284, and they should be able to answer that question directly, as that's a little bit out of my wheelhouse when it comes to the knowledge of the payments and the allocations, but it's a super good question. So, okay, everybody. Well, I thank you for joining us today. I am recording this. We will be sending out a recording of it as soon as I get the link so that you can go back and review this at your leisure. And hopefully you put on your calendar our next Wednesday webinar will be June. I can't believe it's going to be June already. Wednesday, June 12th at 1 o'clock Eastern, 10 a.m. Pacific time. So until then, thank you for joining me here as we went through TimeSolv's Wednesday webinar, and have a great rest of the week and a great rest of the month. Talk to you later, everybody.